Okay, we'll just give it a minute for participants to come in.
Let's start, Anusha.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the third episode of Scaling Conversations with X to 10X. This time we have an interesting topic, OKRs and how it simplifies governance in large enterprises. Yes, OKRs are not just applicable to startups. My name is Anusha and I lead the OKR practice at X to 10X. Over the last few years, we've worked with a few large enterprises, SMBs, and large startups on OKRs. And we've seen a transformation on the prioritization, org alignment, and governance front. One such organization is Sterlite Power, and we have been amazed at how they seamlessly integrated OKRs as a part of their ways of working right from the first quarter. For the listeners' benefit, Sterlite Power is a leading integrated energy infrastructure company with operations in India and Brazil. Sterlite Power is part of the metals and mining conglomerate Vedanta Limited, which is a $17 billion annual revenue company. Sterlite Power was set up with a vision to bring affordable, uninterrupted power to the people and solve the toughest challenges of energy delivery. On that note, I welcome Pratik Agarwal, who is the Managing Director of Sterlite Power, joining us for a chat with Neeraj Aggarwal, who is the co-founder and COO of X to 10X, to discuss what it takes to really simplify governance in large enterprises via OKRs. Under Pratik's leadership, Sterlite Power has built, financed, and operated close to 19,000 circuit kilometers of cross-country high-voltage transmission lines and invested around $6 billion for developing 30 projects across India and Brazil. Pratik recently announced a renewable energy platform, Serentica, which has already signed about 600 megawatt power supply agreements to provide round-the-clock renewable power to large industrial consumers in India. I would like to thank Pratik for spending time with us today. And we hope as listeners, you would get a detailed understanding of Sterlite Power's journey with OKRs. I'm sure the discussion would be an insightful one, and hence one request to the audience. Please feel free to put in your questions or comments in the Q&A section. We will try to address most of them towards the end of the session. With this, I would like to hand over the session to Neeraj and Pratik, and I'm looking forward to the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Anusha.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey, Pratik. Good afternoon.
Hi.
And good to see you, my friend, again. It's always a pleasure to get to talk to you. And when the topic is governance and OKRs, I couldn't have asked for more, really. So thank you once again for taking time out.
Thank you so much.
You had a very, very tight schedule. So thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today.
My pleasure. Thank you. My pleasure.
I remember first interacting with you, Pratik, almost about 2 years ago when you came to our roundtable on OKRs. And I remember thinking that you were the odd man out in that group. We had a room full of
Me too. Felt the same way.
We had a room full of startup founders, and you were the only one from a large enterprise background. And I remember you also asking me that, are you sure you not called me here by mistake? But mistake or not, it was really nice to have you in that group. You were the most engaged. You had the most questions. And you also showed the most intent to go back and implement OKRs in Sterlite Power very, very quickly. I remember when your team reached out and said, look, we're thinking of implementing OKRs in Sterlite Power. Me and Anusha talking about this, and I telling her that, you know what, I think it's going to take them a long time to implement OKRs in Sterlite Power because they've been around for a long time. They have the set ways of working. It's going to take really a lot of heavy lifting to get OKRs implemented at Sterlite Power. But frankly, I was amazed. I was amazed at how quickly you guys implemented OKRs. I think it took less than a quarter for it to stabilize. Something that I don't see even in small companies and startups. Startups typically take 2 to 3 quarters, but you and your team managed to get it done within 1 quarter. So super happy to have you on board today and discuss your, talk to you about your sort of insights and thoughts on OKRs. And hopefully the next one is going to be very enlightening for people on this webinar as well, because you bring to the table a very different perspective, Pratik, from what typically people get to hear from X to 10X. So I look forward to the next.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Neeraj. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. So let me get going, Pratik. My first question to you is, you started OKRs about 2 years ago, but you obviously had a governance system and mechanism, a very solid governance system in the company before you started OKRs. What drove you to think about a change to how you were running the company and to sort of bring about a massively different system like OKRs to the company?
Yeah. You know, just to add to the background that Anusha gave, I started, full-time, business somewhere in 2008-9 when I moved back from business school and effectively started participating in the family business, which is obviously like any other old economy business. It's very large, very well run, very professionalized. But there's a set way of how things are done, how things are reviewed, and how governance is run. When I had a chance to start my own business in 2010 in the world of power and now in renewable energy, naturally I copy pasted how things were done earlier. Having the benefit of going to business school, you also like to implement what you learned in business school. So I implemented balance scorecard in the company, which I thought was nice conceptually. That how do you incentivize people to think both short term and long term? How do you reward and pat on the back for not just short term goals, but also process improvements, game changers? Fundamentally, the concept worked well. Um, I think and we still have balance scorecards for a different purpose in the company. But the limitation of the BSE system is that yes, you're starting off with articulating the what we call now in OKR terminology the L0 goals quite well, and then you pretty much stop there. And you've done that, and then when you month on month, you're talking about the outputs, but actually, there's no forum in which you're sitting and discussing that are we doing the right inputs for those outputs.
Yeah.
And if those discussions happen, they happen in a disjointed fashion, they happen in a disorganized fashion. Now, putting the BSc aside, the governance method were itself, in my mind, very archaic. So people felt, very comfortable, and the general meeting was that the more slides you have, the better the meeting is, and that's how people came to the meeting. That hey, if I come with 100 slides, I'm going to walk away, hopefully confusing everybody, and therefore, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but these heavy PPT meetings is something that started happening 3-4 years into the business. And I kept questioning myself that there has to be a better way. I mean, you can't have, at the end of the month, 5-10 people in the organization focused on creating PowerPoint documents. And the MIS, unfortunately can't come from the IT systems. I mean, maybe the financial statements can come, but everything else does require manual massaging and manual creation. And then even at the end of that heavy 1 day long PPT and 100 slides, you still don't feel comfortable that, hey, I walked away and I really hit those 10-20% of the things that make 80% of the difference. And as a collaborative team, we are clear on who needs to do what. So I knew something was missing, but of course, I didn't know what the solution was. And that first meeting that you described, I felt like the penny dropped. That this sounds about right.
Excellent. I remember you very clearly mentioning in that meeting that one of the things that you were grappling with was the fact that some of the review forums that you had in the company back in the day lasted for about 3 days. You had one segment of the entire month for 3 days locked out only for reviews.
Right.
And I remember you mentioning that it didn't feel like much was being achieved despite spending so much time and energy in those meetings.
Correct.
Tell me, Pratik, how has life changed after OKRs?
Yeah, I think there has been 3 or 4 big changes, right? I would say the most simplest one to explain is just the sheer less time. I mean, I can clearly say we spend today 40 or 50% less time in reviews. Now that's a lot of bandwidth release, right? If you imagine the top tier of the organization, out of let's call it a 120 or a 150-hour work week, if they're spending 10-20 hours, out of a 150-hour work month, you're spending 10-20 hours in reviews, and that goes down by 50%. And that's true for the largest, the most important senior people who should really be out there in delivering and not, explaining their performance. I think that's a huge relief, and people are really happy. I think that's, people are happy that they're not in as many reviews and they're just spending more time doing things. So that's number one. Now, the reason that was possible is because the OKR forces you to think of both the outputs and the inputs. It forces you to really focus on the things that make the biggest difference. It forces you to pick up only 5 or 6 L0 goals and then flush it out to whatever L2, L3, L4 levels. The second big impact is almost no goal in the company can be done by one department alone. So traditionally, if I would have a business review and then I would have a finance review and then I would have an HR review, but actually, I'm not actually I'm talking to these three departments separately, and even if the peers are sitting in the room, nobody is questioning anybody.
Yeah.
Now we're taking the issue and we're saying, okay, we have to increase sales, or let's say I need to double my project execution speed in the next 3 months. Apart from what the project team needs to do, there's an HR goal linked to this, which is to hire 8 more project managers. There's a finance goal linked to this to make 100 crores extra available. And now let's sit together and see where is the bottleneck. That used to happen at the water cooler by chance. Now it's happening in organized fashion. I think that's a very big impact that didn't happen earlier. So I think these are the two big ones. The last one I will say is personally for me, I now feel very comfortable that the 3 OKR calls I do in a month, and we are also dynamically adding and dropping OKRs, which is very important in a fast-growing industry organization. I now feel very comfortable that at the end of an OKR, I haven't missed a big topic.
Yeah.
I know that I have a team, I have an important MD office that ensures the right things are on that tool. And I know that if I do those 3 hours well, I can spend the rest of my time on doing what I do best, which is much more on strategy or fundraising, which is what I do best. So I think it really helps me, get a sense of security and confidence.
Do you also feel, Pratik, now that you started doing these shorter 1-hour meetings twice in a month, instead of one large meeting at the end of the month, do you also feel that you've been able to catch, let's say, things that are not going well early on, and you've been able to course correct and sort of get your outputs to be met much more predictably?
Yes, absolutely. I think, in today's fast-paced world, a month is too long. A quarter is like a lifetime. And waiting for a month and then spending a whole day to get to the bottom of the problem is just highly inefficient. So in this new way by which we're doing these quick 1-hour meetings thrice a month and getting the crux of it out and getting early warnings early, as they're meant to be, I won't go so far as to say that I have 10 examples of where we have, corrected things, but certainly I know about things much in advance, and at least I can manage expectations. I know that something is not going to happen, much earlier now. So I put a plan B or a plan C in place.
No, I couldn't agree more. I remember the big motivation for us also to look at the OKR methodology was initially, even at Flipkart, we would have these monthly reviews. Issues would get surfaced in a monthly review. Then when you would ask for RCAs, they would take another 15, 20 days to come back. And by the time the RCAs would come back, you've lost half the quarter, right? So the OKR framework very, very early helps you catch the input that is not going well, or the input, even if it's going well, if the output is not moving at all, it at least helps you figure out what is the one thing that needs more attention. And you can then focus your energies on that one area rather than actually, equally distributing your time amongst all areas. So fantastic. Now, the other thing I was very curious about, and I was very pleasantly surprised about, Pratik, was, look, you had a leadership team that was very, very tenured. You had a leadership team, which had spent many, many years working, very, very extremely experienced people. And obviously they had also had, they also were exposed to their own sets of, own ways of working. How did you bring about the conviction in them that this is the right governance methodology to adopt? Most people, most companies that I work with, that we at X210X work with, most companies fail at that point. The leadership buy-in is very, very weak. Leaders come back and say, you know what, this is an overhead for me. I'm having to spend now time updating the tool every week instead of actually doing work. And I'm sorry, but this is not helping me. It may be helping the CEO or the founder, but it's definitely not helping me as much. How did you overcome that?
Yeah. It's classic change management. There's no one thing. It's doing at least 5 or 7 things to make a change like this happen. There are a few things that come to my mind. I would say first is, of course, the fact that I was convinced. I think, it's important that I don't do something that I'm not 110% convinced about, right? So the fact that I was convinced, I had conviction, and that came out in my body language, in the way I spoke, that's really important. And of course, I drove it from the top. The second one is that, there was this burning cry from my top team that we have to spend less time in reviews. So I was like, okay, here is a way. Let's implement this. And I guarantee you I'll free up half your time from the reviews. So I think there's something in it for them but I also told them it's not going to be in the first quarter. In the first quarter, it will be double the work, and then it will be half the work after that. So I set that expectation, very clearly. And I think, yeah, and everything wasn't perfect. I think it took us maybe for all departments to update goals, it may have taken almost 2 or even 3 quarters. But I think the results coming early, we reduced our review time from once a month to once in 2 months. And even the timelines of those reviews went from 3 days to 1.25 day max now. I think early decisions coming out of the OKRs, helping them. I think basically striking a balance between giving some early wins to the team and then being dead clear that, I mean, at the end of the day, this is the way it's going to be because, this is a better way. I think that combination worked really well. I want to add one more thing. I was very fortunate to have a very good what I call the MD office, and they sort of did all the hard work at the back. They went through the tool every week, make sure that who's not updating and they're doing it, and sort of helped me run even the OKR call very well. Okay, today we won't focus on all 5 L0s. We'll focus on these 3. I think made sure that the meeting is truly effective and people got take home value from almost every meeting. I think all of that put together. And I think this burning conviction that there has to be a better way, that really helped.
Having seen you in action, I can attest to almost all 3 very firmly. I think your conviction in the process went a very long way in making others believe that this is the way to go. I thought that the fact that you were able to reduce the actual time being spent on reviews by everybody, I think also convinced people quite a bit. And finally, I saw your strategy office in action. I think they were an outstanding bunch of people, really, really high ownership from day one. And more importantly, apart from running the reviews well, I thought that they were also working with different functions and helping them craft their OKRs really well.
That's right.
Not everybody was, not everybody was at the same level of crafting OKRs in the beginning. But I think that you saw the level of OKR writing go up dramatically. And I think your strategy office had a very, very big role to play in that.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think, the whole, crafting a good OKR, I think, I understood that early. Of course, the value in that. It wasn't easy at all. I mean, people saw this as an Excel exercise in the beginning. This is about breaking up a goal into, 10 smaller numbers and, almost like Excel. And I think changing that mindset and explaining why it's it's fundamentally different. And limiting to 4 or 5 breakdown goals. I think it took probably the quality. I think the buy-in came in the first quarter. The quality probably came in the second or third quarter.
That's right.
Yeah.
A lot of people also say, Pratik, that OKRs are by their very nature, because they're set for a quarter at a time, they can actually induce a short-term focus in the company, not a long-term focus.
Right.
How did you tackle that? How did you sort of deal with that?
Yeah. It's a great question. And that was also my worry upfront. In a way, you tackle it in a way like how the BSc also solves that same problem, right? You have to have, like, for example, what we did in our company. Of the 5 L0 goals, there are some goals which give tangible results not in year 1, but in year 2. So, for example, I know that for me to get, the sales cycle actually in our business is as much as 24 months, because you spend about a year creating the opportunity with the customer, then you spend a year winning that opportunity. I know that if I don't spend enough time creating opportunity this year, I'll have nothing next year. So you make sure that opportunity creation, or what we call pre-sales perhaps, is an OKR. Then the 5th L0 goal was a separate goal, which we called foundational goals on your recommendation. And that's all about some of the softer aspects, talent improvement, digital processes, digitizing processes, improvement in our audit scores, internal audit scores. All of that came in there. And we make sure that we don't miss that. Like sometimes we'll have an OKR call where we start with the foundational goals rather than, coming at the end and then you end up missing it and giving it low priority. So, what goals you set is what gets done, and what gets measured is what gets done, right? It's an old saying. And then it comes back to the CEO. If the CEO, if you're a listed company, if you're being demanded quarterly earnings, then unfortunately you'll have that pressure. But we have the luxury of not having that pressure, and therefore we can balance, I think.
Excellent. You've also now seen BSc very closely. You've seen OKR now almost for 2 years. You still are on the OKR path very, very firmly. If I were to ask you to list, let's say, 2 pros of the OKR process versus the BSc framework, I know a lot of people have this question, and 2 cons, 1 or 2 cons of the OKR process versus the BSc framework, because when people ask me, should I use BSC, should I use OKRs? I think my response is there is no one size fits all answer to this question, to be honest. Different things work for different people depending on the culture of the company. But if you've seen both, what would you say are the pros of the OKR process versus BSC and the cons?
Yeah, I think if I had to go back, I would say, see, there's a simplicity to a one-page BSC. It's easy to communicate. And I would say for organizations or industries that are less turbulent, where things aren't changing every quarter or every year, where you're sort of the industry is fundamentally the same. There is incremental innovation or change, and you're driving let's say a 10 to 20% growth. I would say the BSC is not a bad tool because you can set the outputs through the BSC, and once a quarter, once a month, each of your team members have different ways of achieving those outputs, and you don't necessarily need to go into inputs. Also, if you've got a more stable organization, 10 plus years together, they already have a chemistry and they already have a rhythm by which they work, then perhaps you may not need the OKRs. Sorry, I frankly don't know of any such situations. I think most situations demand a lot more dynamic, and it requires you to sit and think of, okay, we know what needs to be done, but how do we need to do it? We need to agree, because there are 6 different ways, and if 6 of us go in different directions, we'll never achieve it, right? If we are agreeing that we're going to put more people on it, let's agree. If you're going to put more resources on it, let's agree. If you're going to outsource it, let's agree. So I think OKRs certainly help in that. I mean, certainly OKRs are a tad bit more cumbersome. This regular updation thing requires discipline. So yeah, I would say, I must say that there is one problem with both tools, which is a universal problem, which is sandbagging.
Yeah.
Once you're going to, once you're asking somebody to create L0 goals, and he knows at the end of the quarter or year, he's going to be measured, and even worse, his bonus may be dependent on that. The sandbagging problem that comes with it is a natural human tendency. I just don't see how you'll come around it. And frankly, I haven't found a better way yet.
Fantastic. It's great you bring that point up. A lot of people also brought this question up earlier, saying that how do you prevent sandbagging in OKR? And I actually tell them that the problem of sandbagging in the OKR process squarely lies on the departmental manager, simply because it's a top-down process. You're setting goals top-down. And when you set a goal top-down and you give that goal to a particular L1 leader, and that gentleman comes back and says, I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can only do this much. If the departmental manager does not have a good handle on what the person can and cannot do, how much is stretch, how much is not stretch, he's got no one else to blame but him. Yeah. So at least in the OKR process, given the fact that goals come top-down, there is a little bit more sort of emphasis, there's a little bit more onus on the managerial layer to make sure that goals are not sandbagged. But it's Correct. A great point. I think we keep getting asked this all the time. I'm gonna pause for a minute and roll out a couple of polls now, Pratik, for the audience here with us. Sure. So Adi, if you're there, the first poll that we will have for you, if you can roll that out, please. Yep. Have you tried implementing OKRs at your organization? Yes or no? Okay. Adi, can we have the results? %60% yes, 40% no. That takes me to the second question that I have for you, which is, Adi, can you publish the second question, please, the second poll? Were you successful in implementing OKRs effectively? For those of you who answered a yes, were you successful in implementing them effectively? Okay, Adi. No. Yeah, it's not a surprising answer at all. 85% of the people who did try OKRs were actually not successful at implementing OKRs. It's for those of you who answered this poll, thank you so much for answering. But you must know that this is the universal truth. A lot of people try implementing OKRs, very, very unsuccessful the first time around. When we did it the first time around, we also were actually unsuccessful at it. There are a few do's and don'ts that we're going to talk about in the next section now with Pratik on what you can do to actually mitigate your curtail your chances of failure when you implement OKRs. Pratik, over to you. Again, if you were to give tips to people on the 4 or 5 things they must do as they started implementing OKRs in their organizations, what would they be?
Yeah, I think, some of them are obvious. Take more time up front, to get the buy-in. Don't assume that people will just do as you say. Even if it makes sense to you, it is definitely not going to make sense to many people. And that's natural. I think you'll have to tell people, either convince them logically or get them to trust you, one of the two. And, we'll have to repeat that maybe for an entire month, even if they say that they're on board, but mentally they may not be on board. So I think taking effort to get the buy-in is quite important. I think in my case, what worked is having that office, we call it the CEO office, which really took charge of it, was like a PMO, was the tool owner, and helped people on the background in drafting the right OKRs, etc. And then I think, like any other change management, some early wins, whether it is, freeing up people's time, whether it is a little bit more collaboration on an urgent issue and people getting early decisions, whatever it is that makes people happy and satisfied. If you can demonstrate that the tool has made that happen, I think that, success breeds success, like in anything in life. So get that first month or two with some early successes, and then you're probably on a roll. You will still hit a fatigue on the 5th or 6th month. So it's not like it'll be a roller coaster forever. But yes, by the 8th or 9th month, it becomes habitual. And then I think you're fine. But I'd love to know what are the reasons people have, why the people think it has failed, and maybe I can, add more to my answer.
All great points, Pratik. A couple of things that I also want to sort of add to those points. One is, look, if you're doing something like an OKR process, which is a massive change management process, you're going to get the whole company onto the process at some point in time. You don't want to be doing it half-heartedly, which is the point that Pratik was making about conviction. You've got to have conviction. The leadership team has got to have conviction. Really, really important. But two, also the one very tactical failure point that I've seen people sort of commit over and over again is they use Excel sheets for OKRs. Don't do that. There are a bunch of good tools out there today. Please use the tool. It's very, very important. OKRs allow you phenomenal historical documentation and record what actually happened quarter on quarter. OKRs, Excel sheets, invariably people would override. It's very hard to make out after two quarters what really happened in the previous quarter. It's very important to use the tool. Allows easier collaboration amongst people. Allows, like I said, historical record of what's going on in the company. And third, also allows you to very clearly see what is failing where. So I would say, please use the tool. It's a very small tactical point, and there are a bunch of good tools out there today in the market. So that's one thing that I would strongly recommend. The other thing that I would say is that, again, the point that Pratik was making earlier, which is people discard OKRs very, very quickly. People try it for a quarter, and very, very within a quarter, you find feedback from your leadership team saying, this is a drain on my energy and my time. I don't want to do it. This is a complete waste of our time, and people discard it. Please remember, the OKR process does take 2 to 3 quarters to stabilize. You've got to have the conviction to stay the course for 2 or 3 quarters. You stay the course for 2 or 3 quarters, then you find people saying, you know what, this process actually is great. It works for me really well. And I'm keen that we actually started adopting it. Not everybody would love it, but you'd find a large number of people in the company starting to enjoy the process. So 2 to 3 quarters is an absolute must have if you really want to make the OKR process stabilize effectively. Thirdly, I would say that one more mistake that a lot of people make is, and you didn't make that mistake, but you in fact managed it really well at Sterlite. Your team, your strategy office team managed it really well. Do not try to take the entire company on the OKR bandwagon in quarter one. In quarter one, make sure you only involve the leadership team and maybe one level below them, and roll it down to the levels below that only in quarter 2 or quarter 3, you first want your leaders to be fully on board, and then of course you can start involving other people after that into the chain. By the end of the 3rd quarter, hopefully a large number of people will come into the process. So those are some of the things that I would strongly recommend, apart from the points that Pratik made. I think you also alluded to the fact that people were sandbagging because they were worried about, the impact the OKRs will have and the achievement of OKRs will have on their performance bonuses. Did you go about linking OKR performance to people's individual performance, and how did that play out for you?
Well, not in a sense, it was already happening. So we already had a system of, let's say, annual goal setting, and then those annual goals are linked to the bonuses. Yeah. And the annual goals do go into the OKRs in one way or the other, whether it's the L0 goals themselves or they're clubbed into some L0 goals. So in a roundabout way, any and all company goals are linked to bonuses. I think I think what you said is the correct one. I think you have to have trust in the team that they are going to take. So what I've been trying to do is I've been telling people that, listen, the point here is to take PAT goals. A PAT goal is something you have an 80% chance of succeeding today, and you don't know where the last 20% will come from. Yeah. You don't want to take the 100 goals, which is guaranteed slam dunk, or not you want to take 2 P50 goals. And then, I try and tell people that, I'm not going to push back on the goals. You guys are senior people. You use a mirror test, right? If you look yourself in the mirror, if you feel you're happy with this goal and you feel that it's a stretch goal, and you can look at yourself in the eye, I'm fine with the goal. Of course, in some cases, I will challenge it where I know the space decently well enough. In some cases, I won't. So I think that's a continuous. I don't think we've solved that completely. I think rather than changing the OKR or the BSC, I think we have to change the performance pay method, which we are currently working on, which is more things. So we are working on that.
Okay. The reason I ask this question again, Pratik, is a lot of people say, the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr actively recommends not linking performance to OKRs. Right. We actually at X210X say the exact opposite. We say, you know what? OKRs are everything that you want the company to accomplish, even if they are stretch goals. And if you don't tie individual performance to that, then you're giving people a mixed signal in terms of what's really important for people to work on. And so we actually say that to drive individual incentives to what the company wants to achieve, you must link OKRs to people's performance. And we've seen obviously, we've seen different people react to it very, very differently. But a lot of people who end up linking individual performance to OKRs, start finding much, much tighter alignment between what an individual is doing and what the company wants him to do. So we at least believe very firmly, we're very big proponents of linking individual performance to OKRs. Yeah. Now, through the OKR framework, Pratik, as you were reviewing your OKRs and OKRs were assigned to different people at L1 and L2 levels, were you also able to get a good sense of the depth that different people brought to the table in their respective areas? Did that sort of expose to you gaps did that expose to gaps in people's sort of roles?
Yes, in fact, I'm glad you brought this up. So what you mentioned about not rolling this out, so I have a similar learning to share. I think when we first rolled out the OKRs, we realized that my L1s were actually never logging into the tool. They were seeing this as one more compliance activity, and they were delegating for somebody else to log into the tool, which then meant that they weren't actually benefiting from the tool at all, because the tool's all about, okay, how are we doing? How's everybody else doing? And what can we do better? One of the ways I corrected that is that by the 2nd month or the 3rd month, I basically said that except my L1, nobody's going to be in the OKR call. Yeah. And the owner has to be somebody on the L1, and they have to report back, and hopefully from the tool. I think that really pushed people to spend some time on the tool before the meeting, and be somewhat ready on how the areas are doing. And you're right. I think there would have been gaps in the depth before, but I would say this would have probably ended up. It forced each of them to remove those gaps, and I think as a result, they're all happier because they have a tighter grip on the subject, and they're probably driving that matter a lot more, and they have more satisfaction. So I do think that helped a lot. And I think not, I go back to PowerPoints, not doing a meeting with PowerPoint and having 10, 20 slides. I think, is just such a better meeting. A simple, straight conversation with a single line and everybody speaking around that goal. I think it's very powerful.
Very powerful. I agree with you. I also, having now been a part of OKR reviews in almost about 100 companies, it's amazing how there are some L1 leaders whose OKR trees are drilled down to an absolutely wonderful level of depth, versus some other leaders whose L1 trees are drilled down to a very, very shallow depth. We can make out very quickly in those meetings which leader has actually got full control on his area and which leader doesn't. And
Right.
one or two quarters into the process, you also start seeing very, very different results playing out in the company. There are some teams that over-deliver, and there are some teams that actually really struggle because the level of thinking is very, very shallow. And the OKR process, I think, also personally allows people to look at and realize very, very quickly which leader is how deep in his area.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. I think I should, something I can do better at, seeing the quality of the maybe L2, L3 OKRs, and that you get a good sense of how much depth there is. Absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Great.
I have one more question for you, Pratik, and then we'll obviously open it up to the people in the people in the forum. If you were to look back and say, if you were to look back and say, the one thing that if I could change one thing about the OKR process, what would it be in Sterlite Power's context?
I would think about keeping the OKRs more current. I think we can do better at that at the moment. I think that in our world, things are very dynamic, and even within a quarter, some OKRs lose their relevance.
Yeah.
I understand my teams are doing it well, better than me in their OKR reviews, which is great. I think in my own OKR reviews, I can do a better job in saying, okay, here's four new things we need to add and 2 things we can remove. I think that's one thing we can do, and that's the power of the tool. I think keep it dynamic, because some inputs work, some don't work.
Yes.
I think I think that's the main one, and continue. I think on the cycle of improving the quality of well-drafted OKRs, make them inspirational, make them motivating. I think use the power of the embedded motivation, even borderline poetic, a little bit better in the OKRs.
Fantastic. Okay. Why don't we look at some of the questions that people have posted? There are a bunch of questions now, Pratik. You've already answered a few of them because some of them came during the course of the roundtable. But why don't I pick up some questions and ask you about them? Did you have a team who knew how to implement OKRs at Sterlite, who helped you implement it? So, Pratik, you want to take that?
Yes, absolutely. I had a fantastic team. Which is my office. They are young professionals from different domain knowledge, and they were the owners of the process. They would help. They learned through with the X to 10X team on what it means to draft good OKRs. They conducted some of those sessions themselves. They organized sessions between Neeraj and his team and my team, making sure people were up to speed. They made sure that enough people were logging in and updating, and then they ran through. Now in our third or fourth quarter, they make sure that before each meeting, either I'm going through the tool or they're giving me a brief on what we need to focus on, and that way we conduct the meeting really well. And at the end of the day, if people in an hour either get decisions or get more collaboration or get a full overview of what's going well, what's not in the business at a high frequency, I think people more or less. They get so much out of it that's the only way they want to run the company.
Do you also want to talk a little bit about the profile of the people in your strategy office or the MD office, Pratik, and help people understand what sort of people, what personas required to be able to drive a change management process like this one across the company?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think any MD office has a dual challenge that you've got to have intelligent people who are capable. We are a projects company and we're a power company. So I have 2 people in my organization, and more actually, but 2 main. One is a power sector person. She spent time in the industry in different parts of the power sector, not in my transmission business. And she gets the sector really well from a regulation strategy standpoint. And then I have Karan, who is a project specialist. He spent 10 plus years in the world of contracting and understands, the challenges, both soft and hard challenges of execution. So I've got to the both domains covered in the office. And then from the softer side, I think people have to be intelligent, they have to be assertive, but at all times avoid arrogance and at all times avoid, dropping my name to get things done. I think that's critical. Because the people need to open up to them, and people in the organization need to see them as on their side as much as being on my side, right, as opposed to being the MD's guy. Yeah.
I think the one thing that I saw in your team also was they had they had the skill to be able to work with all the senior leaders in the company, people who are much older than them. Sure. But they were only older in age. In terms of intellectual heft, a lot of the people in your strategy office actually, stood their ground when it came to your leaders. They were able to work with them, help them craft their OKRs, and inspire confidence, which I think is very, very important. And I think that's the one area that you and Sterlite Power got absolutely bang on. Okay, next question for you. With the changing business environment in the recent days, how would you handle OKRs? Would you change them frequently, or would you revisit them monthly and quarterly?
I don't have a frequency in mind, but I would say the whole point of the OKR is that you are talking of both outputs and inputs, and you can go into any depth of input you want. You can stop at L1 if it's in control, or you can go down to L5 if it's not in control and you need to ideate and you need to troubleshoot something. I think one should be open to changing as frequently, even a week, unfortunately, after setting up the first OKR, which was not something you recommended, but it all depends on the industry, right? I think, our industry, for example, there are lots of policy changes that happen, and every policy change can have a pretty material impact of the business. And I think, waiting for a monthly cycle, frankly, to change it is unnecessary. So I think you should, to each his own, to each, if you have a business that does change month on month or even earlier, I think for us, it's really event driven. So when an event happens, we have to go back and see, okay, do these OKRs still make sense? So yes, I think the right frequency or the cadence of dropping OKRs, and I would say again comes back to the office. I mean, it shouldn't be on the imperative shouldn't be on me. I have my office, I have my team, and every meeting I expect, or every other meeting I expect at least somebody to say that, hey, listen, I'm dropping this one, is not working, and how about these two new ideas?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Look, there are times when the business environment changes so dramatically for you. For example, I remember when COVID happened and everything changed for everybody. At that time, holding on to your OKRs and saying, look, I'm not going to change my OKRs, is obviously foolhardy. You've got to go and change your OKRs very, very quickly. Your OKRs are not meant to tie you down. OKRs are meant to be able to give you a roadmap to whatever you want to accomplish. And if the goals are changing, then the OKR process must be nimble enough to allow you to change your path as well. Having said that, in reasonably stable periods of time, you shouldn't have more than 15-20% of your OKRs changing during the course of a quarter. A quarter is also not too long. It's only 12 weeks. If you find teams who are constantly chopping and changing their OKRs in the middle of the quarter, then there is something to sort of reflect on in terms of what's really going on that team. But otherwise, I would say 15-20% change in normal time is a good to do thing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit, Neeraj, I mean, in a way, and I don't know if you agree, but I see this in the most simplified way, a collaborated to-do list or a collaborated work breakdown structure, like what you told me, right? What you do in MS projects, for example, on day one. And and just like with your to-do list, right? You make a list of 20 things. 2 out of those 20 will become irrelevant for whatever reason. You've changed your mind, they're no longer priority. I think that's just life.
Absolutely, spot on. Okay, how about the idea that the enterprise will have org or functional OKRs and no individual goals? Instead, the individual's JD becomes his goal. Please share your thoughts on this one. Basically, there are no individual OKRs. There are only company and functional OKRs. And individuals are driven by their job descriptions.
I think, yeah, sure. I mean, it comes back to Neeraj, what you said earlier as well, right? How far down you want to take it is, it's an open question. I mean, a lot of a lot of improvement can happen just by having the OKRs at the first 2, 3 levels of the organization, and then let the people after that, choose their own method. Frankly, what works for them. I encourage one of my team members to percolate it all the way down to the last person, and that's the project's organization. But I don't know if he did it, and I frankly don't care either ways. I think agreeing at some unit, at some team level, whether it's a 2% team or an individual or a 50% team, but agreeing at an input level that this input is what matters. And an input is not something that should take 6 months to complete, but ideally like 2 to 4 weeks to complete. I think that's the point. But whether it's an individual doing that input or a whole team doing that input, I think doesn't matter.
I think great point, Pratik. I'll also add to that in response to this question somebody's asked, is that, look, the purpose of having individual names against OKRs that have been taken either at the highest level or at a level in between is to drive accountability. If you don't have people's names, who are you going to hold accountable for their OKR actually going through or not?
Yes.
It's very important to have individual names assigned to OKRs, people who you can hold accountable. And it's very important to have only one individual assigned to every OKR and not more than one.
Yes.
So that it's very clear in terms of who the single-threaded leader for that particular OKR is. JDs unfortunately change all the time. There are very few organizations where a person keeps doing the same thing over and over again, year after year. It's really important to make sure that OKRs percolate down to whatever level you want to. As Pratik was mentioning, some teams may be last level, some teams may be the mid-management level. But to whatever level you take them down to, please assign individual accountability, because otherwise you wouldn't know who to make accountable, who to sort of hold accountable for the OKR actually not getting met. So it's very, very important to link it with people's names.
I fully endorse that. I fully agree. I think putting that name, just because I've put somebody's name next to a dot, it doesn't mean he has to do it himself, and he doesn't. There's no way, because he has a team of, in one case, 200 people below him. But I think that clarity the person has, and even sense of satisfaction that, okay, this is clearly my area, and I'm going to make sure that I get this done through other people. I think it's quite powerful for the individual as well.
That's right. Okay, the next question somebody asked is, can we do OKR only for 1 or 2 departments to begin with?
Frankly, for me, it's not clear, but I would say one has to take a internal view of the organization, and if there's a general feeling that the resistance to change is difficult for whatever historical reasons of that organization, I would be okay with starting with whatever the smallest unit is, where success is likely, and then build on that success, because success breeds success. So you don't want that first OKR exercise to fail. And if it means that you're doing it only in your marketing function or your ops function, because that's where you have the right mindset of people who will make it succeed, I don't think it's a bad idea. But yes, the power of the OKR is in the collaboration. The power of the OKR is in that, okay, how do we make that number happen by HR and finance and, let's say, technology collaborating? So eventually you've got to get there. But I think if that's the way to success, great.
This is such a good point that Pratik made, which is that the importance of delivering initial success to some teams is really important to drive conviction. If that is the case in your organization, so be it. But the preferred route is going to be, look, the power of the OKR process in getting all people across departments to align and work together. The preferred route would be, rather than opening up all people in all departments to the OKR process, even if you have to start with only the heads of the departments across different departments, do that, because that allows some collaboration to start happening. And then you can open up to the other teams later. But again, no one size fits all. If you believe that in your company you want 1 or 2 departments to first adopt it, so be it. But that's a lesser preferred route compared to having more and more departments join the process to begin with. Fewer people, but more and more departments. That's a much, much better way of doing it.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's this question that I will take, which is requested to help with some good tools that help in implementing OKR process. Look, there are many of them. There is Lattice, there is 15.5, there is, all these are tools outside of India. There's a tool called Ally, which Microsoft bought. There is a tool called Profit. There is a tool called Notion. Darwinbox now, an HRMS system in India, has its own OKR module. There are many tools out there which have the OKR module. We at X210X also have our own tool called People Queues, which has got the OKR module. there are many tools out there. So, and every tool has got something distinctive about it. So depending on your particular need, you should evaluate these tools and decide what works for you and what doesn't. But the only point I want to make for you guys is please use the tool, regardless of what tool it is. Do not try and do OKRs and Excel sheets. Doing OKRs and Excel sheets is actually starting off in a very, very wrong foot as far as a pretty significant process like OKRs is concerned. You start with the tool, and there are many tools out there. Okay. Can we say during L3 or L4 level of OKR implementation, Scrum implementation would be much better? I'll take that, Pratik. Look, again, there are some teams like technology, engineering, and product teams where we actually say that please stop the OKR percolation at the engineering manager level. Do not go down to the SD1, SD2, SD3 layer, because those engineers are anyway working using the Scrum methodology, using the Agile methodology on a sprint framework where week on week their tasks are getting sort of monitored and delivered. You have tools like Jira to monitor that, so you don't have to have them on the OKR process. Any layer, depending on which team you're talking about, the layer at which the initiatives can be driven is where you want to stop the OKRs at. Right? For people who are doing very operationally intensive tasks, which are measured by day-to-day sort of metrics, there you don't have to take OKRs down. There the OKRs must translate into metrics or Agile framework related sort of tasks and not OKRs. So again, we can have a separate conversation on this. But like I said, OKRs only to the point in different teams where managerial initiatives are being driven, not operational tasks. Okay, this is a good one. Sumit Sharma has asked this question. In linking OKRs to performance, should we assign only OKRs in indirect control or drive shared OKRs? For example, PAT delivery would be a joint responsibility of L1 teams. I have a point of view. I'll start with that, but maybe you can add to this one. Look, we spoke about it. Even if it is PAT, profit after tax, even if let's say you take a revenue, let's say you take a metric like PAT, you've got one person accountable to drive PAT. Now, there are different parts, there are different functions that contribute to PAT. The L0 OKR of PAT should still be owned by the CFO of the company or the finance function of the company. You want that person to work with different team members and different leaders across the company to drive PAT in the direction that the company expects it to go to. The L0 leader, in this case, the CFO, can break it down into L1 tasks and give one to, let's say, the revenue team, one to, let's say, the operations team, so that, both the revenue and costs, contribute adequately to PAT. But the ultimate accountability in this case for overall PAT is still being owned and program managed by the CFO. Obviously, if PAT doesn't get met, then you will look at which L1s didn't get met and you will hold them also accountable to the PAT failure. But that's the power of holding one person accountable and then him distilling it down further into different sort of L1 KRs and giving it to different people depending on which function they belong to. But yes, link whatever OKR, whether they're direct or indirect, doesn't matter. If the OKR is assigned to a person, he's accountable to the delivery of that particular OKR. And so the performance evaluation of that person should account for all sorts of OKRs that he was owning up. Pratik, your point of view?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the accountability to one person is very powerful. And whenever we have done in any other format, more than one person, I've almost never seen that work for whatever reason, So yeah, I fully agree.
Okay. Another really good question. Are OKRs meant to be democratic? How do I ensure that someone at the L2, L3 level is taking up the right kind of goals? I'll take a stab. Yeah, I'll take a stab.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So look, on this one again, the goal setting process is not democratic. It is top down. You are the founder, you are the leadership team, you're accountable to the board, you've given some commitments. Goals cannot be set up democratically. Let's say I'm the L0 leader in the company, I've been given a goal. I will break it down into the L1 components. It is my job to break it down into the L1 components and assign them to different people. Similarly, when an L1 goal is given to somebody, it's that person's job to divide that into the L2 level goals and assign it to different people. So it is not democratic in that sense. Yes, the acceptance of those goals, depending on people's bandwidth, is an iterative process. And then people can obviously say, look, I'm sorry, but I don't have the bandwidth to take up 5 things. I can only do 3 things. And then collectively you decide what goals can be taken, what goals cannot be taken this quarter. But goal setting itself is not democratic. It comes top down. There's some amount of feedback that you take from the bottom of the process on what can be done, what can't be done, but that's pretty much it. Pratik, your points of view?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the right way to approach it. At least for me, it's important that my team buys into the goals, understands what the goals are. But certainly, as a CEO, MD, I have to have the final casting vote on it, and that's the nature of the job. It's not being autocratic. It's not trying to be dictatorial. It's the nature of the job. I think that you put in the position because you can bring it all together, and you have a unique view of all aspects of the business. So I think the CEO or the MD is the right person to take that final call. But I think it absolutely cannot be without buy-in. So the combination of buy-in and the right set of goals is important. I think the quality of the OKRs L2, L3 is a very important point. Setting up a method by which those are of high quality is something that, it's a little bit like how you, ensure quality control of your products, right? It's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous process. So it's similar over here. I think you have to have a team that understands what high quality OKRs are. Maybe you have to have repetitive trainings as new people come in the organization, why and what high quality OKRs are. Attrition is high in most organizations, so this is probably even more important to do more training. And once in a while, in the meeting, sort of drill down, get into L3, L4 itself, and see what they like.
Awesome. Okay, we're just about 3 minutes left, Pratik. So one final question, and then we can break. When an organization already has strong review mechanisms in place through Excel sheets, how do you convince the leadership team to introduce OKRs? I think Pratik gave some pointers on this, when we started this conversation. The first step is the CEO or the MD or the founders getting fully convinced themselves. That's step number one. Step number two, if you do believe that you've got the problem of not having enough alignment happening in the company, you've got reviews happening, but you're not able to put your finger on what's really sort of failing for us, and you're not able to respond fast enough. I think those are good symptoms for you to sort of think about using OKRs. But to convince a team, frankly, whether it's about doing masterclasses for them, doing roundtables for them, whether it's about doing a workshop for them, do whatever it takes to convince them if that's what's required. But do not start the process till there is full buy-in. And there are many, many ways in which you can build buy-in. Pratik is a living example of how he sort of brought about this change in his company very, very quickly and very, very effectively. So hopefully that should answer that question for you guys. We're at the end of time, guys. Please type in your feedback to the link that has been shared with you on the chat window. It means a lot for us to get your feedback and to know what more could have been done to sort of make it more enlightening for you guys. But Pratik, I want to thank you again so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and talking about your OKR journey with everybody.
No, thanks, Neeraj, for having me. And I really enjoyed this, and I'm really happy to do this because what I got out of this tool, and like you said, being from not a startup and from a much more old school industry, I'm in the business of building cross-country power lines and renewable energy in India and around the world. I think just the ability to implement something like this, free up the company time and do it much better. I'm privileged and very happy to have been able to do this, and I'd love to share with more people. So I hope more of you are able to do this as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pratik. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.